Hi everyone, in Revista Caligari. I'm here with Sofia Bohdanowicz, an award-winning filmmaker from Toronto. She's the founder of the production company Maison du Bonheur. She had retrospectives of her work at Bafisi, Seattle, Cinemateca de Bogotá, Doc Lisboa, Festival do Nomad Cinema. How are you, Sofia?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm great too, thanks.
Good, good,
Uh,
good.
Thanks for your time and good afternoon. Welcome to Revista Caligari.
Thank you so much for having me.
You can see Sofia's film in Soldax now in a special focus. So if you are willing to, you can enter the webpage. Well, I saw all your films recently, chronologically, and some of them a few times. And the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is on many occasions we can see film words or scan texts like covering the whole frame. And regarding dialogues, I had the impression, or I feel like almost all the words spoken in your films are aware that poetry exists, as if words knew there is a poetic use of themselves.
Mm.
Even though not all the texts are not, and not all the films include poetry.
Mm.
And I wanted to ask you, how is your relationship with language when thinking about your films, like your relationship with words?
Wow. That's a really thoughtful question, actually. Yeah, my relationship with words is it's a funny one. It's similar to Audrey's struggle in MS Slavic 7 to kind of, I guess, formulate thoughts and articulate myself. I turned to cinema actually because I noticed that in high school I had a really, really hard time speaking in front of people and like giving presentations and kind of like representing myself accurately through language. It was a really, really big struggle for me. But then I kind of realized because my dad had this camcorder that maybe I could make videos instead for presentations. So instead of, doing a presentation on Wiccans, on witches for my world religion class, I did like a Blair Witch Project spinoff for class. And I was just so much more comfortable with language, but also with the help of images. And that's, how I learned to edit was with this camcorder, and with my parents' VCR. I would do like tape to tape editing. And I think for me, especially when I'm writing films now, and like I'm working on scripts, for example, I always feel like I'm downloading something. Like my scripts come together very quickly, very easily, very organically. Sometimes like I just feel like I'm like a little bit of like an antenna and I'm just like channeling things. Like it'll start with an idea and then I'll start collecting things that I'm really into, and then all of a sudden it'll just appear to me like the voiceover that I wrote for Veslemoy's song. I wrote in about an hour. The formulation of it just came to me very quickly, and it was the same thing for Point in Line to Plane. And sometimes I think with the way that I'm writing and my use of language, it all kind of begins with my grandmother because she was the first person that I started, making films with. And so a lot of these like letters and narration in my films are addressed to my grandmother. And for whatever reason, she is a really great center point for me to kind of, I guess, like address these thoughts to. So I don't know. I have like a very like layered and like complex relationship with language. One where like I really want to make sure that I am seen and heard properly. And I feel like the best way for me to control that like sense of perception is through film. And maybe it's because I struggled so much with language as a teenager. I wanted to put something in my filmmaking that would kind of like balance out that history, if that makes sense to you.
It does. It does. Thank you. You mentioned your grandmother, and well, I wanted to ask you also, Audrey is your cousin's name, and Benek is your grandmother's name. And I feel like a lot of women live together in Audrey Benek. But especially you, like a representation of you, and also Derek is a representation of you. So I was very interested in how was the creation, like the process of the creation of this character together with women of your family and Derek too.
It's another very good question. I like the way that you kind of you proposed it, and it is a character that's made up of a lot of women. No one has ever really like pointed that out before or said it like so acutely, but it's true, you know. It started with Never Eat Alone when I had all this documentary footage of my grandmother and I wanted to kind of tether it all together, but it wasn't making sense and there wasn't like enough glue. There wasn't like a drive for putting all of these images together. I needed like a force to kind of like tell the story. And as we covered in the last question, I'm a little bit awkward like with my words, but also with like my presence in front of the camera. I'm a very hyper aware person, and it doesn't make for a good mood. So I realized that, you know, the relationship that kind of like drove this film forward was the relationship between myself and my grandmother, and I couldn't play that part. So I was like, I don't know, it would be very, very interesting to have someone kind of like restage these moments. And I was really inspired by a friend of mine, a filmmaker named Antoine Bourges, who made a film called East Hastings Pharmacy, where he filmed one angle of people that were lined up in a pharmacy, and then restaged the pharmacist who was handing out medication to them with an actor, which I thought was really, really, really interesting. And I thought, hey, maybe I can apply this formula to Never Eat Alone and work with an actor. And I was in a cheese club with a group of women in Toronto, and we'd get together every month and we'd get a selection of cheese and talk about it. And Dara was in that cheese club, but we weren't like close friends yet. And I, you know, spent like a few months, you know, hanging out with her and eating cheese. And finally, I had the courage one day to ask her if she'd be interested in collaborating with me on this character and on this project. And what's really interesting about Audrey is that she has my cousin's name. She has my mother's like maternal last name. She wears a lot of my clothing. She wears a lot of Dara's clothing. Sometimes she wears my grandfather's clothing. So she really is like an amalgamation of all of these different individuals in Never Eat Alone. She lives in my cousin Grace's apartment as well. And really it's this character that Dara and I have really co-created that gets to, I guess, like focus on different facets of my family's history, of my life, but there's also a lot of Dara's life and Dara's characteristics in that person as well. So it's been really, really interesting, I guess, like crafting different worlds that this character can exist in, and those worlds are usually like pretty inconsistent. It's kind of like the Simpsons formula where the world is just like always different and it's not explained how or why, but it's great to put her in different situations and to kind of see how she reacts.
Thanks. This next question is like related to this. I was very curious about the process of reading Sofia Bohdanowicz. Is that the correct pronunciation?
It's a hard one.
Sofia?
It's Zofia Bogdanowiczova.
Okay.
That's the tough one, and I don't even speak Polish. I'm probably not even pronouncing my own name properly, so do not worry about it.
um, like in many of your films, there is something from the family past that artistically inspires the present. In Miss Slavic, like punctually, but in Belle's Moisson too. And I was very curious about how, like, if reading these texts, letters, and poetry, like, change your way of seeing or perceiving images. And like, I could imagine two ways of relationship between images and text. Like, I don't know, you have some shootings, and then you read a letter or a poem and you think, oh, this poem is perfect for these images, or the way around. Like, I read this poem or this letter and then got inspired by it and went to look for the images, but maybe you had a different process that I don't know. I was very curious about that process, like that relationship between another woman's words and your images.
Mm. Yeah, I mean it's a tough one to kind of, I guess, like translate and to portray, right? Because there's a lot of layers of translation. Like there's like the Polish text, and the Polish text goes to English text, and then it comes to me. And I don't speak Polish, unfortunately, so there's a lot of meaning and nuance, I think, that are lost on me because I don't have that connection to the language. But then there's also, I think, these layers of generations as well. My great grandmother passed away in the late 1960s. So there's a lot that I can try to understand from her life. I can only reach and try to grasp it, but there's no way for me to possibly understand what her perspective was, what she went through. So I think that that tunnel and that passage is a really interesting one to think about when I am like formulating words, images around her words. And I think for me, when I was making these films, it was important not to be too self-conscious about it. Like when you're working with poetry, you don't really want to think too much of the content and how you're going to kind of like transpose it. I think what the aim of like poetry, like really good poetry, is to, I think, communicate like a feeling and a mood and an atmosphere that's indelible, like a feeling that you can't quite put your finger on, or a situation that you can't quite describe, is kind of like formulated in this like little showcase of words. And I think for me, when I like read her poetry, it wasn't so much as like bringing that like world alive literally and visually, but trying to kind of like think about the mood and how I could kind of like bring that into a film. And these letters that she wrote to Joseph Vitlin that are read in bed with the translator, toward the end of the film, I feel like the mood of that moment of what they did and the way that their lives are kind of like touching but kind of like passing by really kind of like embodied the feeling and the emotion that was being communicated in those letters. And also, I think it was like the best way to kind of like let the aura of that show a little bit. So for me, it's not about like taking the words and being like, okay, I'm gonna find these images. It's about feeling the mood, collecting the images, not connecting with it too much, because then I think you can risk becoming too obvious with it, and then seeing where it goes in the edit. That's one thing that really works for me in my artistic practice, is not planning too much, kind of like being open to the world around me, having an idea of like what the thesis is of the film, but just really like feeling my way through what I'm shooting. It either feels right or it doesn't, and sometimes I can explain it and sometimes I can't. But the best way for it to come together, especially, you know, when working with poetry, is to kind of like sit down with a mess when you're editing and kind of look at it and say like, what's the best way for me to organize this? This has always seemed to be, I guess, like the best way of putting it all together.
Okay. I really like that, like a more intuitive or sensitive way of uh, having the materials like relate to one another, and not like I could only thought about, okay, first images or first text and then images, or and it's more like reciprocate. Is that a word that exists, like a conversation? It's more like not a math process, but more like an intuitive process.
And
I really
it
like
is a
that.
conversation, you know, between words and images and how they correspond and connect, but also don't, you know.
Yeah.
It's a tough equation.
And how they can create new images composed by words and images, like when
Yeah.
you relate poetry in images and poetry in words, how they find another relationship, no, like another image they create together. um well, I told you before, I was very impressed by point of line to planes, like ability to synthesize, especially in its sensitivity and attention to the detail of the feelings. How was the process of creating this film?
Well, those are very kind words and also a good question. It's not a film I chose to make. I was very sad that I had to make this film, obviously, you know. And it wasn't a film that I wrote ahead of time. It very much happened to me, you know, and I felt very lucky and fortunate that all of these ideas and coincidences and material came my way. It was a very, very difficult time in my life. It was a year where I experienced a lot of death. There was Jan and Giacomo who passed away, but there were also a few other people who passed away before that as well. And it was a year where I was really kind of questioning the idea of purpose and existence. You know, why are we here? What am I doing? And the process of point and line to plane is kind of like a spooky one, you know. I actually started making the film before my friend Jack passed away and before my neighbor Jan passed away. And I wanted to go to the Guggenheim because they were showing an exhibition of Hilma Afklint's work, and you know, I was really excited about it because one of like my goals and one of my major themes in my filmography is to make work that kind of uncovers the lives of elderly matriarchs, and really looks at their contributions that they've made culturally and to their families as well. And I was like, this is another really exciting story. I should go and check this out. And when I went, they were still installing the show. I went on the wrong day, which has happened to me before at the Guggenheim. It's funny thing. But yeah, I don't know. It was funny, you know. When I walked in, I was like, something is happening, and it's really important. And I don't know what that is, but I think I need to film this. So I pulled out my cell phone and I put it on 4K, and I just started filming, you know, the installation and staring at the work. And there was this magnificent, luminous feeling that I couldn't put my finger on. And I decided not to question it too much, but I was like, I'm going to document this because I feel like there's something for me here. And the next day I returned to the exhibition, and I got to see it, and it was really, really, really powerful because I saw these Venn diagrams, so these circles intersecting in Hilma's paintings, and they started to make me think of my neighbor Jan's paintings, which I had filmed before. And I took a photo and I sent it to a friend of mine who helped me film his paintings. And I said, "This makes me think of Jan. This is so interesting, blah, blah, blah." And then 5 days later, when I was touring another film, when I was in London, I found out that Jan had passed away. And then 4 days after that, when I was in Vienna, and I talk about that in the film, I found out that Jack passed away. So it was a time where things were really, back to back, just in terms of, these big moments that kind of like throw you off course, and you're not really sure what you can or what you should do. And it's funny because the making of this film really started when I was at Jack's funeral, and his twin sister said, "You will forget what people said, you'll forget what they did, but you'll never forget how they made you feel." And she was quoting Maya Angelou, and I remembered Kandinsky's paintings because that was like the first point of intersection that Jack and I had in our friendship. I bought him magnets from the Guggenheim when I was 19 years old. And that's like where our friendship started. And when I looked at his paintings, I really felt and saw our friendship. And then I started digging around more because I went through this period of magical thinking that Joan Didion describes so well in The Year of Magical Thinking, where your brain like can't comprehend or understand that this person is gone, and it wants to continue the conversation, it wants to continue that relationship with the person. So it looks for things in your day to day to kind of make these connections to, I suppose, like maybe find some reassurance or find a way to have like signs, from the other side. So one thing that I discovered was that Jack died on Hilma af Klint's birthday, which was a very strange coincidence, which I didn't put in the film, but it's a very funny thing, and he had the same birthday as Mozart, and I was in Vienna when he passed away, and Mozart died of like, I don't know, like strange circumstances, which felt like similar to Jack's. And yeah, there are all of these things that really kind of fluidly connected things together as I was making the film. And I kind of became this like little detective, I was trying to kind of like build this case or like build some kind of like evidence, that, there's still a way to kind of access, his essence, or there's still, I think I really wanted to try to find a way to continue our friendship. And I did this through making this film. And it's funny because I'm doing a talk with a filmmaker who made the Hilma af Klint film Beyond the Invisible, and I was watching her documentary, and I learned that Hilma af Klint only had one exhibition in her lifetime in London, and it happened on July 25th, and that's my birthday. Is that crazy? So
It's
I mean,
interesting. I feel like you were talking about these coincidences, or I don't know how to, it feels like it's more than a coincidence. And it reminds me of how, and how they are connected. And it reminded me of her paintings, because colors are connected in a way that like your color and his color are like you and him, or me and you, like separate colors, but when they connect, they create a new one. And it's very beautiful. You can actually see connections on her paintings. So I thought this is Hilma's painting. It's a connection between all these feelings and all these colors and all these situations. So it's another coincidence I find here.
Yeah, no, her work is very special and very powerful, and I discovered it at a time in my life where I was really questioning, my own, mortality and existence. And it's crazy because actually, like, I didn't know that all of this stuff about Kandinsky. Like, I just, like, aesthetically really liked his paintings, but like in a very like surface way. And I didn't know that he was an artist who experienced synesthesia. I didn't know that he was trying to give an image to forces that we can see. He really wanted to give an image to sound, which is why a lot of his paintings are called improvisation and composition, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know, this kind of like discovery, I guess, of like spirituality and these invisible forces and all of this stuff that Helmuth, Klimt, and Kandinsky talk about in their paintings was a really comforting discovery for me, because I think through that I really learned that, our energy is here. I think it exists, and you can create, a certain type of energy, but you can't destroy it. And I think that when someone passes away, I think that energy goes somewhere. I don't know if that's like too much on the level of like quantum physics and spirituality, but for me, that was the great discovery in making this film. And I found it to be very comforting. So all of the detective work paid off.
Thanks for sharing and like being so open to share this experience of the creation of the film and your life experiences too. This is more like a gossipy question, but
Yeah,
what
yeah.
can you like, what can you tell us about A Woman Escapes and Opus 28, your upcoming
Oh, you want the hot gossip.
film?
Wow. Okay. I actually haven't spoken about them in an interview yet, so these words are going to be fresh.
I have the premiere. If you don't want to like
Yeah, no.
please.
Okay. So many exciting things are coming down the pipe. So, A Woman Escapes is a collaboration with two filmmakers who are very dear friends of mine, named Barak Chevik and Blake Williams. And we made it during the pandemic when I was stuck in Paris. And it's a hybrid film. That's shot on three different formats. So it's shot on 3D, it's shot on 16 millimeter, and it's shot 4K as well. So it's very special in that way. And basically, the short version of it is that Barack and Blake both approached me to make correspondence films at the same time. And I wasn't really sure what to do with it. And I started working on both projects, but then I kind of felt like I was like cheating on one with the other. And also, I was going through a very hard and strange time in my life because Julianne, who stars in Maison du Bonheur, had just passed away. And I was having a really hard time outputting work. And they really wanted me to make correspondence work that really documented my day to day. And because I had already done that, really, I felt in a way in Point in Line to Plane, I was like, I can't talk about grieving again in my filmmaking process. It's too much. So I kind of devised this narrative line again with Audrey, who's living in Paris, and is trying to navigate this correspondence between these two men. And that's all I will tell you for now. But we just finished the film We won a prize through Ivan Granovsky's Catapulta, which was really great. And we finished it at Churubusco Studios in November, which was an incredible experience. It was my first time working with the studio. I really loved it. I learned so much. So we're hoping to release the film sometime this year. So that's coming
That's
down the
great
pipe.
news.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited about it. And Opus 28 is kind of, I guess, like a longer version of Veslamoy's song. So again, it's about Kathleen Parlow, who was a great violinist at the beginning of the 20th century, who collaborated with Edison and who had this huge concerto dedicated to her when she was 17 years old, which is like pretty wild. And it's called Opus 28. And it was performed once in Norway, and it was lost because the composer Ewan Halvorson had a habit of burning his concertos if they were poorly reviewed. So it premiered, it got bad reviews, and then it was kind of like socked away. But then 5 years ago, someone found the concerto in an archive, in a shoebox, actually, which is really funny. And that was Kathleen Parlow's shoebox. So she preserved it, and it was lost and it was found again. And they performed the concerto once in Norway about 4 years ago, but it hasn't premiered again. So I really wanted to make a film that kind of resurfaces Kathleen Parlow's history, but also does something special with the concerto. So I won't tell you what that is, but Dara and I have been working on it, the script, for about 3 years now. We were mentored by Atina Sangari in her lab called Oxbelly, which was really, really cool. And I have producers in Montreal that I'm collaborating with on that as well. And they run a production company called Green Ground. All this being said, it's a project that's like much bigger than my other work. I'm jumping from budgets from like 10 to 50,000 to a budget where the film that we're building right now should be just over $1 million. So it's a really big step for me in, I don't know, in my own filmmaking practice, but also I think in Audrey's journey. We'll see, but I think this will be like the last Audrey film that kind of caps off the cycle. And for me, and it's not like I'm talking about it like diminutively, but I feel like all of the other films that I've made about Audrey are these kind of like experiments and like drills that have kind of like led Dara and I to this like bigger project where I think that the character, but also the filmmaking, will really be very alive and intense, and bigger and more tangible. I'm really excited to kind of work on a larger scale. And I think Dara is too. So we will be shooting that, I hope, in September, I think, but we still have like some funding windows to jump through. So it's a very, very, very big project, a huge labor of love, and hopefully people will be able to see it in 2023. But who knows what will happen in this world.
I'm looking forward to great news. Congratulations for both projects.
Hey.
And thank you for sharing. I encourage everyone to see Sofia's films. I personally like them a lot. So thanks for your time and your thoughtful answers and sharing your process. It's very inspiring. So thank you. And we are all looking forward to A Woman Escapes and Opus 28, of course. Hope to see them more sooner than later.
I hope they'll be out there too. And thank you, Lara, for this amazing interview. I really appreciate it. Thoughtful questions. And it's also really exciting for me to be screening my work again in Argentina, because I feel like at the beginning of my career, I got the most amount of love from Argentina. It's funny because when I first made Never Eat Alone, I wasn't getting it into any film festivals. It took me about a year and a half to get it programmed. And finally, someone at the Vancouver Film Festival picked it up, and I was programmed there, which was really a huge relief for me because I thought that film wasn't going to see the light of day. And there's a programmer there named Augustin Macedo who saw the film, and he wrote to me and he was like, we'd like to program it at Bafisi, but I heard you have other work. Like, what else do you have? So I kept sending him films, and he was like, okay, we're going to put this in the program and we're going to put that in the program. And it was so positive that I thought it was a joke because I had experienced so much rejection, and he was like, we're going to do like a focus of your work at Bafisi. And I was like, how is this possible? And I don't know, I'm very, very, very grateful to Argentinian audiences. I have like a very special place in my heart because it was the first time where I really started screening my work and finding like a dialogue around it. And I've always found that folks in Latin America are very open and interested and curious about my work. So I'm very, very grateful to be screening my work on Solex.